Usually, stalkers fixate on their target, or even the target's significant other. They derive a twisted pleasure from seeing the person who rejected them suffer. But sometimes, criminals are willing to go much further and destroy anyone who stands in their way. Arboga, Sweden, is a small town located approximately 160 kilometers west of Stockholm. In 2008, it was struck by a crime that is still considered one of the most shocking to ever occur in the country. On March 17, 2008, 23-year-old Emma Janestig, a mother of two, was spending the evening with her children. Her older child was 3-year-old Max, and the younger was Saga, who was just 1.5. Emma was preparing dinner, expecting her fiancé, Torgny Hellberg. Torgny was still at work and was expected to return in a few hours. Emma was divorced, and in the years leading up to these events, she had met Torgny. Over time, they realized they couldn't live without each other, so they moved in together and even bought a house. The move happened only 2 months before the tragedy. Even though Torgny wasn't the biological father of Emma's children, he cared for them as if they were his own. It seemed Emma had found the perfect man to build a complete family and raise her children. Max and Saga's biological father, Nicholas, continued to maintain contact with the children and had a good relationship with his ex-wife. He communicated with the children and saw them almost every day. Around 6 p.m., the children and their mother sat down to dinner. Torgny couldn't be there this time, as he was held up at work. He said he would be back around 7:30 p.m. So, while waiting, Emma decided to take a break and sat down at her computer. She wanted to exchange a few messages with her family and friends. Emma used a messenger app and started chatting with her sister, who received the last message at 7:07 p.m. Their conversation continued, but then suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Emma wasn't reading new messages or replying, which seemed strange. Her sister decided to contact Torgny and told him that Emma was acting oddly and ignoring her. It turned out that Torgny had finished work a little earlier than expected and was already walking down the street towards the house. He replied to his friend's sister that he would check what was going on. The man appeared at the doorstep at 7:17 p.m. Everything seemed normal from the outside, but the open front door immediately caught his attention. Usually, it was always locked. Unsuspecting, Torgny entered the house, where a horrific scene met his eyes. Everything was scattered in the hallway. Things lay on the floor, and some pieces of furniture were broken. At first, he didn't even understand what had happened, so he decided it was some kind of game the children had gotten out of control, although he realized that the scale of the chaos was too serious for the children to have caused and for Emma to have allowed. He called out to everyone by name several times, but no one answered. Suddenly, at the end of the corridor, Torgny noticed a suspicious figure on the floor, and when he got closer, he froze in horror. He saw a small body on the floor, lying in an unnatural position. The face and head were so badly damaged that he didn't even understand who was in front of him. But judging by the clothes, Torgny realized that the victim was little Saga. A little to the side of the first body lay Emma. She was also sprawled out in an unnatural position, covered in blood. She had similar injuries as the first victim. The man understood that he needed to act as quickly as possible, so he immediately contacted the emergency services. At 7:20 p.m., the dispatcher received a call from a distressed man who was screaming into the phone in despair. He reported that someone had attacked his family while he was away and asked for help. At that moment, a woman's groan could be heard in the background. It was Emma. The dispatcher immediately sent police and an ambulance to the address. The medics arrived in a matter of minutes. By this time, Torgny had found all 3 members of the family with serious head injuries. They were literally beaten beyond recognition. Surprisingly, doctors discovered that all the victims of the attack were still alive and breathing. However, the prognosis from the very beginning was unfavorable. Even a visual examination showed the presence of such serious damage that the medics were sure that the lives of each of the victims were hanging by a thread. Of course, Everyone was immediately taken to the hospital to provide emergency care. Max and Saga were in critical condition, and Emma was less injured. The woman was taken to the intensive care unit and immediately put into a medically induced coma. The doctor's expectations from the very beginning were very bad. Even if the children and the mother could survive, the brain injuries they sustained would most likely leave an indelible mark on their lives. Despite the bad prognosis, the doctors fought desperately for the lives of each of the victims. Meanwhile, forensic scientists were already working at the scene of the horrific attack. The scene resembled a scene from a horror movie. Due to censorship, I cannot show photos here. The area was cordoned off. It was supposed to examine the entire house, where there was a terrible chaos. The sad fact was that the medics left a large number of traces while trying to provide assistance and taking the victims away. Many items were moved in order to gain access to the victims of the massacre and take them out onto the street. In fact, the crime scene was trampled, and this could have destroyed evidence. It was obvious that the attack occurred in a maximum of 13 minutes. The break between the last message that Emma's sister received at 7:07 p.m. and 7:20 p.m. when Torgny called the emergency services. Of course, from the very beginning, the head of the family became a suspect. However, the man had a solid alibi. He was indeed at work, which was confirmed, and then made his way home and was caught on surveillance cameras along the way. When all suspicions against the man were lifted, the time intervals were clarified. Obviously, he was telling the truth, which means the attacker had only 10 minutes between 7:07 p.m. and 7:17 p.m. when the man entered the house and discovered the injured. Although Torgny was no longer considered a suspect, they decided to talk to him at the police station. It was assumed that he might have seen or heard some clues necessary for the investigation. Nevertheless, the man insisted that he had not seen any strangers or vehicles. The only thing that caused suspicion was the unlocked front door. After that, the detectives considered Emma's ex-husband as a possible attacker. It seemed that Nicholas was a likely suspect. According to Torgny, for a long time, his girlfriend and her ex-husband continued to have conflicts over communication with the children, as well as the division of property and alimony. Sometimes, it all got out of control, and the heroine of the story even turned to the police with a statement, as she was afraid for her safety. However, that was a long time ago. Long before the tragedy with the children and the woman, they had reached an agreement. Everything got better. Even Torgny himself was quite calm in his communication with Nicholas. They had no disagreements, and there was no motive for the attack. Torgny insisted that he didn't believe in his girlfriend's ex's involvement, but there were no other options. After the interrogation, Emma's father took the man. Together, they went to the hospital to find out about the condition of the woman and children. On the way, the men turned on the radio and first stumbled upon news of the bloody massacre. The radio reported that the children had died without regaining consciousness in the hospital just a few minutes ago. Emma's fate remained unknown. This news was devastating for the men, who couldn't believe that something like this had happened to their family. It was unclear who could have so coldly attacked the woman and innocent children, so brutally taking their lives. At this time, the police were actively working at the crime scene, gathering information bit by bit. It became obvious that the perpetrator was from the victim's immediate circle. This was indicated by the ultraviolence, the clear desire to leave no chance of survival, and the brutality with which the children were beaten. There was clearly a personal motive here. Whoever this monster was, he hated his victims, so he lost control during the murders, inflicting so many wounds on them. At that moment, the only likely attacker was still Emma's ex-husband, because in the past, there were conflicts and disagreements with Nicholas. He even threatened her, which was the reason for contacting the police. Therefore, the man was arrested and sent for interrogation. From the very beginning, Nicholas was shocked by what had happened. Nevertheless, he answered the detective's questions calmly enough. The biological father of the deceased children had an alibi, He was in another city at the time of the attack. Despite the fact that the information provided had not yet been verified, the ex-husband's behavior proved that he was not the killer. The police had only one hope: 23-year-old Emma, who was still desperately fighting for her life in the hospital. If she could survive, she would become an invaluable witness for the investigators and give them important information about who the killer was. To the horrors that the victim's family experienced, the fear was added that the criminal would return and finish what he had started, depriving Emma of her life. To protect the victim of the attack, round-the-clock security was assigned to her right in the medical institution. The prognosis was still unfavorable. She was in critical condition. Doctors believed that even if the woman survived, there was a high probability that she would be disabled for the rest of her life and perhaps would not remember the attack. No other witnesses to the attack could be found. The neighbors saw and heard nothing, so the police began to check the surveillance cameras that were in the area. It was assumed that this way it would be possible to track down the attacker and understand where he came from. It was also important to find the murder weapon on which the criminal's traces might have remained. Therefore, the surrounding area was examined by patrols with special attention. Even search dogs were used. Unfortunately, this did not bring any results. The forensic expert was able to find out that the children were attacked with a heavy, crushing object, like a hammer or a similar tool. The children were hit with great force, so their skulls were completely shattered. Each child was struck several times, which indicated the strong emotions, the rage that the attacker felt. Such behavior was an important clue, but no one from the immediate circle, nor Tordney himself, had any idea who was capable of such cruelty. The young family had no connection with the criminal world. They had no enemies. They were good people. The police's suspicions about a personal motive were quickly confirmed, as nothing was stolen from the crime scene. Even valuables and money were in place, which means robbery was ruled out. The forensic examination in the house ended the day after the murder. By this time, Nicholas had been removed from the list of suspects, as the man's alibi was confirmed and he was released. Emma was still in a medically induced coma, and there were no shifts in the investigation. The media showed great interest in this case. Not only was it a question of an area with a low crime rate, but the choice of victims and the degree of cruelty were shocking. Law enforcement officials appealed to local residents through the media. This really attracted people living in the immediate vicinity of the victim's house. One of the passers-by, at about 19 hours, saw a person in black with a hood on his head appear on the doorstep of the house. It seemed that he was standing in indecision on the doorstep. About 5 to 10 minutes later, the same witness was returning from the store and saw a suspicious guest of a fragile build in black running out of the house, getting into a car, and immediately driving away. Unfortunately, he didn't see his face and couldn't describe the car, but it seemed to him that it was a woman. After this message, several more witnesses appeared, who gave a similar description of a person loitering in the area without purpose before the attack. It became clear that this stranger in black was the criminal. Then Tordney came to the police station and told about his ex-girlfriend. The man reported his concerns about her. Lately, she had been behaving inadequately. It was about 31-year-old Christine Scherer. The girl was born in Hanover, Germany. When she was 11 years old, her father left the family. After that, Christine and her father rarely communicated. She went to New York on an exchange program and lived with relatives in Manhattan. Returning to Germany, Christine settled in Göttingen, where she studied history for the next 6 years, and then went to Greece and took part in excavations. While in Athens, the girl got a job at a hotel, and she also worked as a historian. Then she went to the island of Crete, where she also started working in a hotel. In August 2006, 26-year-old Tordney went on vacation to the island of Crete and checked into a hotel where Christine worked. On the very first day of his stay there, the young man met her, and they began a romance. The relationship continued for 5 days of vacation, and then they continued to correspond when Tordney returned. After that, The in-love Christine even came to visit him in Sweden, where the couple spent several days. When the girl left, she offered to go skiing later, but Torgny didn't have much desire. According to the man, already at this period, he began to experience strong doubts about this relationship. Christine in ordinary life turned out to be completely different, not like during the vacation. And then, in January, he sent Christine a message that it was over between them. But she couldn't accept this thought calmly, so she tried in every way to improve the relationship. The girl constantly wrote, continued to persuade him to reconsider and resume their romance. In March 2007, she came to Sweden again for 2 weeks. On this visit, she persuaded Torgny to have dinner. The young man agreed, but when the former ones met, he repeatedly repeated that only friendly relations were possible between them. In words, Christine accepted this idea and left. But after a while, she returned to Sweden again, insisted on a new meeting, believing that this should be the last joint dinner at which they would put an end to it. During the meeting, she offered to try again. Torgny categorically refused, as he believed that everything had already been decided. The girl reported that since they couldn't have any more relationships, she would like to come to him and pick up things forgotten after the previous visit. The man agreed. It was a short visit, after which Christine left. But the very next day, the girl called again and asked for help. She had stopped near some castle and couldn't find her way back. The young man responded, and when he found the intrusive ex, she said that the night before, she had taken a large dose of medication, hoping to voluntarily end her life because of the breakup. Out of compassion, Torgny allowed her to stay, but first, he contacted her relatives in Germany. The young man said that Christine was having problems, she would be back soon, and asked them to take care of her and place the girl in a psychiatric hospital. The man was sure that the ex needed help. Torgny hoped that treatment would solve all the problems with obsessive behavior. In addition, the girl would be far enough away so as not to bother him anymore. Christine was indeed placed in a psychiatric clinic for 3 weeks. Unfortunately, even that didn't stop the stalker. In the summer of 2007, she came to Stockholm and planned to stay here for a long time. Christine met a Swedish woman with whom she began to rent a shared apartment. In parallel, the stalker began looking for work. It became known that in January 2008, she flew to Germany, but on February 20th, she returned. After that, she wrote to the ex-boyfriend that she had given birth to a son from him. At the same time, Christine admitted that she had given the child up for adoption to another family, as she herself had problems with mental health. Torgny was stunned by this news. After all, he didn't even know about her pregnancy, and the dates didn't match. The man asked her when the birth took place, to which Christine replied, "Why do you need to know? In my opinion, this is not such an important detail." Already then, he felt a trick and began to ask why she gave the child away. Christine tried to manipulate the object of pursuit, stating that because of the breakup with him, she still wouldn't be able to raise the child, as her son would constantly remind her of the pain caused by Torgny. Christine reported that she had recently gone to Germany on business. Their common child suffers from some hereditary blood disease. According to her, if the doctor's fears were confirmed, then the adoptive parents would contact Torgny to talk on this topic. The man remained in bewilderment. At this time, he already had a serious relationship with Emma. The couple lived together with their children, and in January 2008, they moved into a new house. His new girlfriend knew about the problems with the stalker and the story with the birth. She also didn't believe it, so she asked an important question: in which hospital was the child born? She wanted to check this information to avoid problems. But Christine also couldn't answer this question. It seemed that she was lying. After a while, Torgny was actually called by a stranger who introduced himself as the adoptive father of the son. He confirmed the stalker's words and reported that the biological father should contact Christine. Allegedly, the biological mother of the child was in poor mental condition, so they needed to go to Germany together and solve the problems with the baby. It all sounded implausible. It seemed that some acquaintance of Christine at her request, was calling him and trying to bring them together. By this time, Torgny and Emma were sure that the story with the child was completely fabricated and staged because she couldn't even provide any evidence of the existence of son. Therefore, the victim of the stalking, Torgny, appealed to the police with a request to influence the inadequate ex. The apartment that Christine rented with her friend was visited by law enforcement officers, but when the police arrived at the call, the neighbor reported that Christine had left for Germany the day before. The detectives checked and found out that Torgny had indeed previously sought help, but the police still couldn't do anything. The investigators began to check the version of Christine's involvement in the murder. They managed to confirm that the girl was obsessed with her ex and was in Arboga on the day of the crime, and then immediately left for Germany, which only increased the suspicions against her. To resolve the difficulties, the Swedish police had to work with the German police, and many facts testified against her. On March 20th, an arrest warrant for Christine was obtained. The media immediately released a message that the alleged killer had been found and was in Hanover. During this period, her mother and brother saw the message on the news, so they called the police. The woman asked why her daughter was being searched for. The detectives replied that she was suspected of committing a brutal attack. Christine's mother was shocked and couldn't believe her ears. After that, Christine herself called the police and reported that it was some kind of mistake and she had nothing to do with it. Nevertheless, she was arrested. After the first interrogations by the police, she asked to speak with a lawyer. The defender quickly found out that the arrest warrant contained an error, so she was forced to be released. But just 24 hours after that, the Swedish police received a new warrant. This allowed for the rearrest of Christine on March 29th. The detainee behaved calmly, insisted that she had nothing to do with what had happened. While searches were carried out in her rented apartment, her mobile phone and laptop were taken, as well as the things in which, according to the main suspect, she was on the day of the murder. According to her, Christine was wearing a beige jacket. There were two of them in her apartment, but there was no blood on either of them. It seemed that the suspect was lying because witnesses had seen a black jacket on her. During the search, a black jacket was found in her apartment, but it was carefully cleaned and there was no blood on it. Perhaps this was other clothing. Most of all, interest was aroused by search queries. On Christine's laptop, many photos of Emma and her children, a plan of the house where the family lived, were found. It was obvious that the suspect was preparing for the crime in this way. Also, shortly before the massacre, Christine was looking for ways on the internet to hide the traces of the crime. In addition, she constantly monitored the social media page of her ex-boyfriend. All this spoke of the extreme degree of obsession with Torgny, which was only confirmed after her diary entries were found. They detailed the victim's data, including the address and even some habits. By this moment, Emma's condition had improved slightly compared to the condition she was in before. Nevertheless, the doctors still didn't give any guarantees regarding her survival. In addition, it was unclear what consequences the injuries received could have. The woman was scheduled to be brought out of the coma on March 27th. Loved ones waited for news with bated breath. Emma was brought out of the coma for long hours. It was unclear what awaited her loved ones. After waking up, Emma couldn't say anything, but it was noticeable that she recognized people. All this gave hope for recovery, and relatives breathed a sigh of relief. The police immediately began preparing for a particularly important interrogation, which was supposed to take place as soon as Emma could speak coherently. The police were going to talk to the victim. They couldn't tell her about what had happened to the children, even if she asked. It was necessary to give exclusively evasive answers so as not to worsen the survivor's condition. This would also contribute to the fact that during the communication with the detectives, she would give more accurate answers, and the traumatic information would not affect their reliability. On April 1st, just 3 days after Emma was brought out of the medically induced coma, the first visit of the investigators took place. Despite all the efforts of the police, the woman couldn't remember anything. She didn't even understand why the police had decided to talk to her. She didn't know what had happened and why she was in the hospital. The doctors hoped that the memory of the events of that evening would return over time. Emma increasingly asked about her children. It was decided that hiding this information was too cruel. That same evening, after the first interrogation, the doctor talked to her and told her about the attack, but without details. Immediately after this short dialogue, Emma simply fell asleep. It turned out that in the morning, she didn't remember anything that the doctor had said. This condition continued for several weeks. Given the patient's condition, it was decided to continue giving evasive answers about the children. In addition, she was forbidden to read newspapers and watch television. Because of this, the woman began to get angry, as she simply couldn't understand what was happening. Emma didn't realize that the children had died. She continued to talk about them as if they were alive, despite the fact that the mother had been told several times about the death of her son and daughter. In the end, the doctors decided to work more persistently. After another conversation, the woman realized that she would never see her children again, but she still didn't remember what had happened, so she thought that she had been in a serious car accident. By this time, the forensic scientist had prepared a report on a thorough analysis of the crime scene. Unfortunately, either the medics trampled all the traces or Christine's efforts to prepare for the murder worked. She left no DNA samples or fingerprints in the house. In addition, they still couldn't find the murder weapon. Christine's roommate told the detectives that a hammer was missing from her toolbox in March. According to the description, it looked like the murder weapon. This happened just before the attack, so it became indirect evidence of her involvement for the police. Given the lack of significant arguments for bringing charges, the investigation continued. The detectives focused on the shoe prints found at the scene of the children's murder. Unfortunately, in this case, it was necessary to discard dozens of other traces that belonged to paramedics, all three victims of the attack, as well as Emma's partner. Traces of sneakers that weren't worn by the people living in the house, as well as the rescuers who arrived, were found. The detectives calculated the brand, model, and size, but Christine denied that she had ever worn such shoes. However, after a careful analysis of her photos on social media, it was possible to find a refutation of her words. On her page, a photo was posted where she was wearing exactly the same sneakers. The shoe size matched, but this evidence was indirect. A number of the clues included records from the surveillance cameras of the railway station, which show that Christine, in a dark jacket, had arrived in the city at least 3 times in the last week before the attack. The last time this happened was on the day of the murder, March 17th. Unfortunately, the images were not clear enough, but her identity was confirmed by the geolocation of her mobile phone. When asked about this, Christine couldn't give any sensible explanations regarding her presence in the city. Later, the girl explained that she had come for work. The only thing that didn't cause any problems for the police was the motive for the attack. According to Christine's records on the computer, she was very jealous of Torgny for Emma. The girl just couldn't accept that her beloved had found happiness with another woman. A psychiatric examination was appointed. The suspect was found to be sane. The police continued to do everything to help the miraculously surviving victim remember something. For this, they even went with her to the crime scene. But this didn't help either. Suddenly, a few days after that, a breakthrough occurred. Suddenly, she remembered that on the evening of March 17th, someone knocked on the door. The hostess opened the door and saw a girl in dark clothes and a hood on the doorstep. The stranger introduced herself as Tina. She suddenly hit Emma on the head with something heavy. After that, she lost consciousness. It's scary to imagine what happened next in the house and what the defenseless children experienced. On July 29, 2008, Christine appeared before the court in Sweden. She was charged with double murder and attempted murder. The defense was very optimistic, as the lawyers considered all the evidence against the defendant to be circumstantial and easily refutable. When Christine entered the courtroom, she behaved strangely. She waved friendly to most of those present, smiled and laughed inappropriately when it came to the murder of children. This played into the hands of the prosecution, as it demonstrated a cruel and inadequate image of the killer. The defendant continued to insist that her visit to Arboga was related to her work, and she was going to go to the excavations not far from the city. The prosecution argued that on that day, Christine had arrived in the city to commit murder, and before that, she had come twice on March 12th and 14th to monitor the objects of the attack. The prosecution also argued that Christine was a pathological liar and obsessed with her ex. It was never possible to find any evidence that Christine had ever been pregnant and had given birth. No one saw her pregnant, and there was no record of childbirth, and even more so of adoption in any maternity hospital. The pregnancy dates didn't match. Her story with the birth of the child of Torgny was a clear lie, which characterized her not in the best way. The most important witness for the prosecution was Emma, who, on the very first day of the hearings, identified the defendant as the very Tina. She remembered how she had opened the door to the criminal about 10 minutes before Torgny returned from work. Emma was so overwhelmed, facing the murderer of her children, that she lost consciousness right in the courtroom. This was an important confirmation of the fact that until then, the woman had been isolated from any information related to the suspect and her crime. This also played into the hands of the prosecution. The defense side expectedly focused the jury's attention on the fact that all the evidence was circumstantial. Neither the murder weapon with Christine's fingerprints nor DNA traces were found at the scene of the massacre. The prosecutors referred to the blurry footage from the surveillance cameras and the footprint of the sneaker. They explained that the medics who provided assistance trampled the crime scene, destroying valuable evidence. Also, one of the witnesses recognized Christine near the crime scene, which confirmed the fact of her being near Emma's house, who also identified the attacker. The defendant couldn't explain why she had made search queries on the internet to find out information about concealing evidence, nor could she explain why she needed photos of Emma and the children, as well as a plan of the house in which Emma and Torgny lived. As in any other controversial trial, the decision was delayed. It had to be waited for until August 26th. As a result, the jurors found Christine guilty of the charges. As a punishment, she received a life sentence without the right to parole. The court also ordered her to pay compensation to the mother of the murdered children in the amount of 100,000 kronor, which is approximately $10,000 US dollars. The lawyer immediately tried to appeal this decision, but the appeal was rejected. It was assumed that if Christine ever got out of prison, she would be deported to Germany, and she would be forever banned from entering Sweden. She is the 7th woman in the history of Sweden sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2012, the criminal was transferred at her request to the women's prison in Vecta, Germany. She periodically tries to get the court's decision overturned and a new trial held, and insists on her innocence. At the same time, Emma continues to struggle with the physical and psychological consequences of the injuries she received. For years after this struggle, the woman gave an interview in which she said that the main thing that helps her cope is the memory of her children, whom she remembered alive. Torgny supported his beloved all this time. They later got married. The couple had 2 children who know the tragic story of their deceased brother and sister. Despite the fact that the criminal is in prison, Emma fears that she will continue to fight for a review of the case and may even achieve it. She believes that in this case, she could once again become a target for a new attack by the inadequate Christine.